The first guest of the evening is truly a poet. He's an artist. He is a friend and an inspiration to anyone who has ever played the guitar or tried to write poetry. Would you please welcome Gordon Lightfoot?
I have been down in the valley of tears. I have stood on the highest peak for the best part of a week. Battered and bruised, I had pulled myself through every scene I would never repeat. This is Carefree Highway Revisited, the show that celebrates Gordon Lightfoot's music song by song, a proud member of the FM Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mike Messner, and with me today is a fellow Lightfoot fan from St. Paul, Minnesota, Wade Peterson. Wade, thanks for being on the show with me tonight.
I appreciate, Mike. Thanks for the invitation. I love being here. Thank you.
All right, awesome. How did you first get into Lightfoot's music?
So as a kid in the 70s, I was a little kid, and you'd hear like Sundown and Reckie the Edmund Fitzgerald, and If You Could Read My Mind on the radio. And I wasn't a fan or anything, but it's on the radio. I knew who he was. And when I was about 17, I'm walking in a record store. They still had the 45s up, with the displays. And they had the jacket. Anything for Love was the single from East of Midnight. Something like drew me to like buy that 45. And I have no idea why. I'd never heard the song or anything like that. And I bought it. And then I was mesmerized because the flip side was Let It Ride, which I loved as well. It was like another 6 weeks till the album came out. And I was just waiting day by day for this album to come out. And I bought it. So East of Midnight, when it came out in July, that was the first album I owned. And I just could not stop listening to it 24/7 for like a year. So I came into Lightfoot in a later period. As a result of that, I bought all the earlier stuff that I could get my hands on gradually and listened to everything going back to 1965. So I heard everything. That was my experience.
Very cool. It explains why you wanted to talk about this song. And you're not the only one who got into him sort of in the later years. I've had other guests, and I was very young in the 70s too. I just knew that I really liked this guy, the music that he was making. Did you ever get a chance to see Lightfoot live in concert?
I saw him 13 times. First one was in 1987 in Minneapolis, and it was basically the East of Midnight tour, so it was largely centered around that album. I actually got to see once where they did the Anything for Love with just the tape where the band went off stage and he played the backing and did it. So I was really grateful to see that once. 12 of the times were in Minneapolis or St. Paul, and one time in Eugene, Oregon. I was living there in 2001. So the last time I saw him was 2018 when he was in Minneapolis. It was a tremendous show. It was probably as good as any that I'd seen.
Now, the places that you saw him, were they huge venues or were they more theater-like?
The larger venue stage had largely passed when I first started seeing him. First two shows I saw were in Northrop Auditorium, which held about 4,000 people at the University of Minnesota. Then later I saw him either at the State Theater or the Orpheum, typically in Minneapolis, which are more about 1,500.
Interesting that you mentioned the State Theater, because that was actually the last time that he played Welcome to Try was at that theater, the State Theater in Minneapolis.
Yeah, and I believe I was not at that show because I think he did 2 nights that year. I could be wrong on that, but I don't believe I was at that show.
Now, you wanted to talk about Welcome to Try, which is late in his experience, in his recording experience. And I wanted to know, what was it about that particular song that drew you? You've talked about Anything for Love. You talked about the flip side of that, but why Welcome to Try? What's special to you about that?
The weird thing about that is that when the album came out in 93, because it had been 7 years since I had a new album, other than Gord's Gold 2, which had a one new thing, basically. When that album came out, I listened to it like continuously for about a year, Waiting for You, which is actually now my favorite record, even more than East of Midnight. The thing that was interesting is that was actually my least favorite song in the first probably 6 months that I listened to it. Only Love Would Know was the song that I really liked off that album, which I still really like. And it's just one that like sort of grew on me gradually over the years. And it became my favorite song over a long period. I can't explain exactly why. You know how certain songs are in your head?
Sure,
Like
totally.
you're walking down the street, that's the one that became in my head. So that and Wild Strawberries were the two that kind of came in my head from that record. I was in New York 2 years ago, walking down the street, and Welcome to Try like is just continually rolling in my head.
And, some songs do take a while to grow on you. And I haven't done Wild Strawberries on the show yet. So maybe we'll do that at some point in the future. I think for me, it was an anthemic kind of song. The rhythm that he uses with that either snare or kettle or kick drum, whatever percussion it is, that this is one of those that's kind of cinematic, kind of something that could be played in a stadium, or something along that line. I was kind of thinking Journey. I was thinking Def Leppard. I was thinking bands that would go over very well in stadiums. Gordon's music, I've never thought would go well in stadiums, but this particular song at least gave me that sense that he had a little bit of that in mind when he was producing it. Is there a particular event in your life that you connect to the song besides the ones that you've talked about?
So when I was listening to it a lot, pre-streaming era, so you had a cassette or a CD. I was working in a retail job actually. I was in the back room like doing inventory and that sort of thing, and I would just continually play the record. I mean, it's an album to this day I've never gotten tired of. It's that good. The other thing that I would say, Mike, that I want to bring up is around the time of Salute, there was a particular vocal change in Gordon Lightfoot where he sort of sang in slightly higher octave than he did prior to that. And I actually preferred the later voice, which a lot of people didn't. And so part of it is the vocal stylings that he had in that song. That's something that drew me in.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how I would describe it, but it's a higher tone or a higher thick, or it's a little thinner.
Thinner. And I actually liked that better. And I can't explain why, but that was another part of the song that really connected with me.
I think it really fits the physical shape that he was in. And when he did East of Midnight and then Waiting for You, I mean, he was getting on in years for a musician, still in great voice, didn't seem enfeebled at all, but his voice had changed. And I think that is something that happens to at least male voices as time goes on. He smoked, and that certainly did not help matters. He'd had some health issues, but I don't think there was anything we can pin down to say, okay, his voice changed because of boom, which is different from some others that we've had. Yeah, you said that you could pretty much listen to this song anywhere, doing anything under any pretext. Is that still true, or is there one setting where you think, this is the perfect place for Wade Peterson to listen to this?
Well, every so often I sit down and listen to the record again. It's never been released on vinyl, I believe. So I actually don't have the record that I'm aware of. I have it on cassette, CD, and streaming, obviously. It's one that, usually late at night, I love listening to while I'm driving.
Yeah.
It's one that I typically do all 10 songs straight through. It's not one that I want to stop. And for some reason, I think the songs are perfectly placed 1 through 10. It's one of those albums that's just laid out perfectly.
And I think some of that has to do with the fact that it was Gordon who produced the album. There was no Lenny Waronker or somebody like that to kind of say, hey, get out of the way. I'm in charge here. I mean, he did this pretty much the way he wanted to.
With his own band. Yeah.
With his own band. Yes. Not too many people guesting on this one. Not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It just is. And it's certainly a group that was tight. So he could probably knock these songs out fairly quickly. I don't know exactly off the top of my head how long the recording process was, but it couldn't have been that extended. Well, the song Welcome to Try, there's not a huge amount that I could find on the origins of the song, but it said in the Nicholas Jennings book that the song, quote, details the rough and tumble of alcohol binges and sexual conquests and mentions his children and his admonishing mother. That is the sum total of everything I'd find out about the song. Do you have any other angle about how it got written, what the inspiration was, what the context was he wrote it in, anything like that?
I've never heard, there's much less written about this period of his songwriting. I've never seen anything. I read the Nicholas Jennings book when it came out, and it definitely connected with me, like reading that, the chronology of his life in terms of how the song may connect. I agree. It's much more autobiographical, I think, at least the way I would interpret it, than other of the songs that he's done.
I think this is a song in league with In My Fashion
Yeah.
from Shadows and A Painter Passing Through from the album of the same name. I mean, it really is autobiographical. For some reason, it wasn't quite as impactful as the other two that I just mentioned to me personally. It had a different feel to it. And maybe that was because I had heard the first two songs I mentioned before I heard this one. So I knew the story, just it was alluded to in a little bit different way.
In My Fashion is another one of my favorite of his, by the way.
Yeah, we did that one in our first season. So you'll want to take a listen back to that if you can find it. You're listening to Carefree Highway Revisited. We'll be right back after a word from a podcast partner or two.
Hi, this is Audie Martello, the host of the Mostly Folk podcast, a 60-minute foray into the music we all love. You will hear newly released albums, classic folk, country, and bluegrass music, as well as some traditional music that may or may not be true to the genre. Sometimes irreverent, often opinionated, but always entertaining. You may even hear a radio magic trick every so often, as well as numerous interviews via Zoom and telephone with established as well as indie artists. Mostly Folk is available wherever you listen to podcasts, and always at mostlyfolk.org.
Radio is so much different than it was in the 80s. We had it all. The music, the movies, the DJs, and morning shows. Back to the 80s Radio is a show from the 80s in podcast form. We bring the memories from that awesome decade back. Join Toscano and Chang every Friday as they take you on a ride back in time, sharing their experiences and laughs. Stop on by and discover some of the wacky things this crazy duo comes up with. They talk about it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the greatest decade. Don't miss the greatest 80s podcast in the world. Back to the 80s Radio.
So let's talk about the lyrics here, which to me and to most of the people that I have on the show, the lyrics really are the thing that set Gordon apart from most other songwriters. I have been down in the valley of tears. I have stood on the highest peak. This is a guy who's had good times. He's had bad times, like any of us. But I think the fact that he is a superstar means that his may be a lot higher in maybe multiple ways. And his lows are probably more low because they are public. I mean, what he's doing is in the public eye. He doesn't have, even at this point in his career, and by this time he'd passed his commercial peak, he was still being scrutinized. I mean, this was somebody who still had some attention being paid to him. So he didn't have as much of a private life as he would have later on.
Yeah, I mean, his last real hit was probably like 1982, if we think about Baby Step Back. So we're talking about 11 years coming from that. Definitely you can sort of see his own thought about that. And the other thing I've always thought about is like, how far back is he really going with this? I mean, the song actually in some ways goes really far back, where he's talking about his mother, things like that. So it's definitely like a long-term perspective.
Oh, yeah, totally. And he does it in such a way that you can't really pin things down for his chronology. The same way, I mean, if you were talking about things like Dreamland, it was pretty obvious he was talking about Kathy Smith. You know, there's autobiography and there's autobiography. Battered and bruised, I had pulled myself through, and he'd certainly had emotional and mental battles. So I kind of see this as metaphorical. I don't know if he was ever injured in a fight as a grown man. And there are some rumors and stories that I don't know are true or not, that he did get physically violent with at least one of the women in his life. But I don't know if he's ever been beaten up in the physical sense, at least not as a grown man. Every scene I would never repeat. And I think of the alcoholic, and we know that Gordon was one, saying over and over again, I am never doing this again as long as I live. And this time I mean it. I think he is probably alluding to something that I think every addict goes through. You know, I'm feeling terrible. I'm hungover. I've done this terrible thing. And now I'm going to break away from it. And I can't necessarily.
Definitely. I mean, you can see that. I mean, you even see those themes even on his last album, like the song Return into Dust, that has references to that period as well.
I have hung out with the beasts of the field, and with them I've spent many a long night, got in some awful bad fights. Okay, so this is a biblical reference. Okay, the beasts of the field, that's from the book of Psalms. But I think he's talking about his connection to nature there more than any sort of religious convictions he may have or may not have. Awful bad fights refers to the struggles he's had with substances and with women. Those can be verbal fights, or again, he is alleged to have struck Kathy Smith at least once or something like that. Sounds of my own heart breaking, not to mention my mind. Now, Lightfoot has suffered a lot of heartbreak in his life. 3 marriages, the long-term affair with Kathy Smith, and all the rest of it. He's had his share of craziness also. One person that I've talked to about Lightfoot said that for a little while, he would only refer to himself in the third person. That may have been part of being drunk. I really don't know. But he's certainly been through the ringer emotionally in a lot of ways. Nothing can hurt me, a small voice said, into a mic, take a hike. Now, I found this interesting. What or who the small voice is here. If it's speaking into a microphone, it's not so small anymore. So do you have any thoughts about this?
That line has always perplexed me my entire life. I have no idea where that comes from.
I wonder if it's his demon on his, like the demon on his shoulder, or the angel on his shoulder, or it's an internal voice, but if it's speaking into a mic, maybe that's a metaphorical thing, maybe it's not. But maybe that's one that we just never get the answer to. We just have to leave that one alone. No one will lead me astray anymore. You are welcome to try if you like. And this idea that Lightfoot has learned his lesson. He won't be taken away from his values. By this time, he'd been sober for a few years, but he enjoys the challenge that someone might present him, or maybe he's being a little bit defiant. I mean, when I think about this, the first thing that came to mind was Pat Benatar and Hit Me With Your Best Shot, which is this kind of bring it on kind of defiance. Did you, resonate with it in the same way?
Good, yeah. And especially even, I mean, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but the last line of the song where he sort of ends with that again, I've always felt I had that same feeling from.
He kind of repeated that same stanza.
He sort of leaves it off as more like a challenge at the end.
Okay, and he does that in a nice way. I mean, he ends the song, and maybe the listener is supposed to say, okay, I'm going to take you up on that. Or something is going to come down the pike that is going to challenge him. And it's going to be his health issues, but of course he doesn't know that in 1986. I had been down in the valley so long, I had almost run out of respect. I think most people, if they've brought themselves to that depth of their own experience, they're losing their self-respect, not necessarily respect for somebody else. Battered but wise to the truth and the lies that no layman would ever accept. I love the way that he put that line together. The use of the word layman is interesting there. Is he alluding to aspects of the life of a musician that no one else could understand? Because layman implies that this person isn't a professional.
Yeah, because it's another place where you see that sort of quasi-religious imagery almost. But yeah, the sense of, I always thought somebody who's not a professional, that's exactly how I interpreted it.
Because there are some things, we can read Once Upon a Red Eye, or we can read these biographies of people who have been rock stars or people who have been close to rock stars, but we don't really know what that life is like because we've never lived it. And most of us never get to, for better or worse. These threads that you seem mean so little to me. They don't count when they put us to rest. And it feels like he's contemplating materialism. He certainly had a lot of material success and social status. But now, at this point in his life, you got to think he's pushing 50 when he writes this song and records this song. He isn't really as concerned with being stylish as much as he's interested in being understood. And as the saying goes, he can't take it with him. Do you feel like he's talking about materialism there, or is there something else going on?
Completely. That's exactly just the accumulations that you have when they doesn't count when they put us to rest. And you see, again, actually, I don't know why I keep thinking this. I've always connected this song to Return into Dust. I feel it's like a very similar thematic song in a lot of ways, which connected with me, when that came out. Yeah, that's how I interpret that.
Yeah, it's a song about mortality, or at least it's a mention of mortality there. And by this time, he's realizing, as most of us do when we hit middle age, okay, that, there's stuff that's left undone. We haven't done it yet. All of my children are healthy and sane. They may say anything that they like. And he's proud about having overcome some adversity. And yet, through it all, he's managed to be a good enough parent that his kids are okay. He has said that he wished he had been there more for some of his kids, although he was there for Meredith in a way that he maybe wasn't to some of his other children.
He was very young when this album came out.
Yeah.
I always thought about it because I knew he had kids very recently, right before this album. And he was a guy who wrote typically the songs were written right before the record, not for a long period. He didn't have they weren't always stored. So I believe, my understanding of this album is most of the songs were written right prior to the record.
Yeah, and that's consistent. His modus operandi has been always, when it's time, he writes his songs and he records them. But he doesn't do a whole lot of writing once the sessions have started. I'm talking about him in present tense. To me, he's still alive and kicking.
Some of us are still hoping that the estate will be releasing some stuff that hasn't come out yet. So.
Yes, well, hope springs eternal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're listening to Carefree Highway Revisited. We'll be right back after a word from a podcast partner or two.
Sandro, look!
Yes, Zach? Wait, what's that thing you're holding up?
It's a time travel device. We can use it to go back to the past and watch movies.
But we already do that on our podcast, Oldie but a Goodie.
No, on previous episodes we were pretending to time travel. Now we can do it for real.
Cool, so we can really go back to like the 80s or the 90s?
No, Sandro, you're thinking too little. We could go really far back, like we travel back over 100 years into the past.
Oh, but Zach, that's so far in the past. Those movies would be old.
Yeah, but, the show is called Oldie but a Goodie, so we should probably do old movies.
Oh, that's a good point.
That's right, folks. This year on Oldie but a Goodie, we're going back further than ever before.
Wait, who are you talking to?
We're starting in 1920s, doing one movie from that year, and then moving up to 1921, and we're continuing that until the year 1969.
Nice.
Join our time-traveling journey through cinema by subscribing now to Oldie but a Goodie, out wherever you get your podcasts.
A That's Not Canon Productions podcast.
Is that song really a cover? What instrument are they playing there? What do those crazy lyrics mean? If you're the kind of person who thinks about stuff like that, you're in luck because I've got just the podcast for you. How Good It Is chooses a single song each episode and takes a dive into the story behind the song and the artist who made it famous. I'm Claude Call. You can find me in your favorite podcast software or just point your browser to howgooditis.com.
How good it is.
Sitting alone in the Blue Ridge Saloon is no place for an angel to be. Ladies make faces at me. Okay, so he's alone. He's in a bar, which is a dangerous place for an alcoholic to be. But he's also okay with the fact that he's not an angel, even though he may have tried in the past to be angelic or trying to be charming or all those things. Maybe some women think he is washed up or unattractive. By this time he was looking very weather-beaten because he had put his body through a lot, let's face it. But if you compare that to things like Somewhere USA or the times when he seemed just like this insatiable sexual beast, I wonder, is this the same guy who wrote Sundown and who wrote Somewhere USA? He's come a long way from who he was just 10 years previous to this.
The other thing, this was the biggest gap between albums.
Up until that time, yes, it was.
Until that time, yeah. It was 11 years, or it was 5 years after this, but so even longer than the next one. So in terms of the personal changes that happened in that time, it could be a more substantial shift.
Yeah. We finally get around to him talking about his mother, who I'm not sure if she had passed away by this time, but my mother said, with the life that I led, I'd be broke. Holy smoke. And at some point, she must have sensed or known for a fact that he was drinking too much. He was traveling too much. He was womanizing too much. That eventually he'd either be bled to death, metaphorically speaking, by women who wanted him for his money or had been jilted by him, because he'd certainly left a body count with that also. I think it's maternal instinct as much as anything else. And then he repeats the idea of, you are welcome to try if you like. So there's, that defiance thing. And you mentioned that he ends the song that way. Well, the song was on Waiting for You, which was his 17th original album. It was released on April 13th, 1993. It was recorded during March of 92 at Studio Eastern Sound in Toronto. It was on the Reprise label. Lightfoot produced it. It was not released as a single. It's the 5th song on the album, which I know you said you didn't have it on vinyl, and it may not have ever been released on vinyl, but that would have been like the end of the first side.
I had it on cassette. It was the end of the first side of the cassette.
Okay, so it's good facsimile of what it was like for vinyl listeners. So this thing was, I don't want to say it was hard to find, but I don't know how many people actually listened to it. And it certainly was not single material. The instrumentation might have been, but I think it was too cerebral for a lot of people who were listening to music in 1993. I mean, because that's the grunge period is coming along. Yeah. And where is he going to fit in all of that? The album went to 24 in Canada, and that shows that Lightfoot had some staying power in his home country. I don't believe it charted anyplace else.
Yeah, there was only one single released from his I'll Prove My Love was the only single, and I believe that was only released in Canada.
Wouldn't surprise me, because at that point, he certainly was making great music, but his commercial heyday had passed him by. I don't know how many copies this record sold. It didn't have the same financial success as Sundown or Summertime Dream or even Endless Wire at that point. Wade, what is your favorite musical element of the song?
It's the vocals, and just like you described, Mike, the anthem-like quality and like the vocals that just that sort of pushing through. And for some reason it struck me, and gradually struck me, as I said, these were vocals I hadn't heard before, like especially like the last line. You hear like sort of an anguish in them that you didn't necessarily hear in other ones in that way.
It was anguish that I think was coming from emotion, but I think it was also just the way that his voice had changed. It had a certain attractiveness to it. I don't want to go out on a limb and say that it was better than his younger voice, but it certainly had drawing power. I think would be the way I would say that. For me, as I said, it's the percussion and the way that it begins as being anthemic. I mean, something where he really wants his audience to pay attention to what it is he's singing.
It almost has an Edmund Fitzgerald quality, actually, like in the anthemic, in terms of just the theatrics of the song in some ways.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, the theatrics of it, good, or the show business element of it. As you said, it is his band. I couldn't find any information that said anybody guested on this. Gordon,
I think his band was the only one on that. Yeah, I don't think there was anyone else on this record.
Kind of a return to form, because he had all sorts of people guesting on East of Midnight and on Salute, and probably on Shadows too. But this was Gordon, Terry, Rick, Mike Heffernan, and Barry Keenan. That was it. And if there was anybody else that had a cameo, they didn't list them in the liner notes. Lightfoot only played the song twice in concert. They were both in April of 1993. The first was at the Orpheum Theater in Vancouver. That was on April 14th. And then 8 days later, he played it for the second and the last time. That was at the State Theater in Minneapolis.
I was at one of the 93 shows, but I believe it was not that night because I did not hear it.
Kind of a shame that he didn't play this song more. But as I've said so many times in the past, number one, this wasn't a single, as you said. And two, he had such a wide palette to draw from in 93, and there were only so many minutes in the concert. He couldn't go on all night. even if he'd been physically able to. He only played it twice, and that was another reason I was asking you, my goodness, why do you want to talk about this one? But I'm glad we did. Wade, I could not find any official covers of the song. Are you aware of any?
None.
Okay. Is there anybody that you would like to hear do this song?
The one that I came up with that I think would actually do a really good job is Dwight Yoakam. Dwight, I mean, on every album he does one or two covers and sort of does his own version with them, and I think he could really do something with it. He has covered Sundown, I believe.
Yeah, I believe you're right. Interesting choice. The only person that I thought of, if we could ever get them together, I'd love to hear REM try this.
Oh.
Believe it or not, and they're not very well known for singing other people's material, but I would like to hear the kind of approach that that band had. And they were contemporaries, and they were probably listening to this record because they were the hottest thing in show business in 1991. So they were probably listening to this. And I'd love to hear Stipe's vocal on this, and I'd love to hear what Peter Buck did with the guitars and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think that would be great as well. Yeah, that's a great one. I'd love to see some of the later Lightfoot songs covered. There haven't been many, of the post-1980 songs that have been covered by anybody. I think there's a lot of material out there.
There have been a few, but certainly not as many as the early stuff. And just hasn't been that much time that's passed. But I think the day will come when somebody else will record this, and it'd be interesting to listen to. Wade, as we're kind of wrapping up, do you have any other closing thoughts on the song?
I want people to know about this song, and I want people to discover sort of particularly like the post-1983 Gordon Lightfoot, which I think a lot of people have not discovered, and there's a lot of great stuff there. Waiting for You is my favorite album now. It was East at Midnight, and I mean, Solo's even in my top 5, so I really like that later period.
Wade Peterson, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's always good to talk to, especially new guests, and kind of get them into the vibe of what we do on Carefree Highway Revisited, and love to have you back on the show again real soon.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate it, Mike, and I'm really glad you're doing this podcast.
And thanks for listening, everybody. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it. Carefree Highway Revisited is on Apple, Spotify, Acast, or wherever you get your listening matter. I'd like to make a special request for you to visit my Patreon page. I love this show so much, and I want to keep it going, and you're in a position to help. Please head over to www.patreon.com/Carefree Highway Revisited. $1 or $2 a month is all I ask. You can reach me, Mike Messner, at teachermike72@gmail.com. Next time, we'll be talking to Glenn Nelson. He's been on the show before, but he'll be making his second appearance. He's coming from Keller, Texas, by way of Oklahoma City. And he and I will be giving our views on the 1975 compilation album Gord's Gold. And that episode will be coming out in either late November or early December 2024. Until then, for Wade Peterson, this is Mike Messner reminding you, run for the roses, but don't forget to stop and smell them. We'll see you next time.